There, all set.
You always are.
The town of Pinewood. Ridge sat nestled in a valley where winter arrived early and stayed late, and where everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast. Jakob Thornfield was a mystery they couldn't quite solve, a mountain man who descended from his cabin every few months for supplies, speaking only when necessary, his weathered face telling stories his mouth never would. The widows of Pinewood Ridge had set their sights on him like hunters tracking prey. There was Margaret with her golden hair and honeyed voice, always positioning herself by the general store entrance. There was Sarah, whose famous apple pies appeared on Jacob's wagon without invitation. Even the young and beautiful Catherine, barely widowed a year, had batted her lashes and offered to mend anything he needed mending. But Jakob walked past them all as if they were fence posts, his ice-blue eyes fixed on some distant point only he could see. What none of them noticed was Eliza Hartwell, who sat in the shadowed corner of the cobbler's shop, her fingers working leather with the devotion of prayer. Eliza was the town's invisible woman, heavy-set, plain-faced with mousy brown hair she kept in a practical bun. She never attended socials, never spoke unless spoken to, and seemed content to disappear into the woodwork of daily life. Her father had been the town cobbler until consumption took him, leaving Eliza with the shop, the skills, and the kind of loneliness that becomes a comfortable companion. She first noticed Jacob's boots on a bitter February morning when he'd come to collect a harness repair. While her assistant handled the transaction, Eliza's eyes had fallen on those boots. Quality craftsmanship, once expensive, now held together by amateur stitching and sheer stubbornness. She saw how the sole had separated on the left boot, how he'd tried to fix the heel with wire that would cut into his foot with every step. That night she couldn't sleep for thinking about those boots carrying a man through mountain snow, failing a little more each day. The next time Jacob came to town, Eliza did something she'd never done before. She closed the shop early, waited until she saw him leave the general store, and followed at a distance until he stopped to adjust his wagon. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Your boots," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jakob turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Up close he was even more intimidating, tall and broad-shouldered, with scars that mapped a hard life across his hands and face. "What about them?" His voice was like gravel shifting. Eliza almost fled. Instead, she forced herself to continue. "They're failing. The left sole will separate completely within a week. The right heel will follow. You'll be walking on frozen ground in your socks before months." And Jacob looked down at his boots, then back at her. "You offering to fix them?" "Yes." The word came out stronger than she expected. "No. Charge, she swallowed hard. "I can't stand to see good boots dying badly. It's disrespectful to the craftsman who made them and the man who wears them." Something flickered in Jacob's eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition. He studied her for a long moment, and Eliza felt stripped bare under that gaze, certain he was cataloging all her flaws, all the reasons she had no business speaking to a man like him. Instead, he sat down right there on the wagon's tailgate and began unlacing his boots. "I'll wait," he said simply. Eliza's hands trembled as she took those boots back to her shop, aware of the widows watching from windows, their faces pinched with confusion and contempt. Let them watch. She had work to do. She worked through the night by lamplight, her skilled fingers performing surgery on dying leather. She reinforced the soles with double stitching, replaced the heels entirely, treated the leather with oils her father had taught her to make. As dawn broke, she held up boots that would carry a man through another hard season. When Jakob returned at sunrise, he examined her work in silence, running his calloused fingers over every stitch. Then he put them on, stood, took a few steps, and looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Before we continue to Chapter 2, if you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We bring you powerful stories of unexpected love, hidden worth, and the beauty of seeing beyond appearances. Don't miss what happens next. Jakob didn't say thank you. He said how much. Eliza shook her head. "I told you. No charge. Can't accept charity," Jakob said firmly. "Then consider it payment for teaching me something," Eliza replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Those boots were made by a master, Studying them improved my craft. You helped me by letting me work on them. Jakob's eyes narrowed, assessing whether she was lying to spare his pride. Apparently deciding she wasn't, he gave a single nod and left. Eliza thought that would be the end of it. A strange, brief encounter she'd replay in her mind during lonely evenings. But 2 weeks later, Jakob returned with a haunch of venison wrapped in canvas. He set it on her counter without a word and left before she could protest. A month after that, he brought firewood. Premium hardwood that would burn long and hot, stacked neatly outside her shop before dawn. The widows noticed, and their sweetness toward Jakob curdled into something sharper. Margaret began spreading whispers that Eliza had used love charms. Sarah suggested loudly that some women had no shame, throwing themselves at men so far above their station. Catherine, perhaps the cruelest, simply laughed when Eliza walked by. Eliza tried to ignore them, but words have weight, and she carried them home like stones in her pockets. She decided she wouldn't speak to Jakob again, wouldn't give the gossips more ammunition. But Jakob had different plans. The next time he came to town, he walked straight into her shop and set his boots on the counter. They didn't need repair, they were in perfect condition. "What's wrong with them?" Eliza asked, confused. "Nothing, but winter's coming hard. They'll need maintenance." Jakob's face was impassive. "Thought I'd bring them before there's a problem." So began a pattern. Every few weeks, Jakob would bring his boots, and Eliza would find small tasks to justify his visits, conditioning the leather, checking the stitching, adjusting the fit. They rarely spoke beyond what was necessary. But Eliza began to learn Jakob's silences. She learned he'd been a trapper, that he'd lost his wife and daughter to fever 5 years ago, that he'd gone to the mountain to escape memories that followed him anyway. She learned he noticed things, how her shop cat limped, how she rubbed her right wrist when it ached from overwork, how she barely ate the meals she packed for lunch. In turn, Jakob learned that Eliza's apparent contentment was really resignation, that her size came from eating her feelings in a town that made her feel worthless, that her skill with leather came from a father who'd seen her worth when no one else did. One April morning, when Eliza's shop had been vandalized with cruel words painted across the door, Jakob found her scrubbing the wood with tears streaming down her face. He didn't ask questions. He simply took the brush from her hands and finished the job while she wept. When the door was clean, he finally spoke. "Been asked?" 3 times to marry since autumn, he said conversationally. Margaret offered to cook for me every day. Sarah promised to give me her late husband's land. Catherine said she'd bear me sons to carry on my name. Eliza's heart cracked. Of course he'd choose one of them. Why was she even surprised? "What did you say?" she whispered. Jakob looked at her directly, and for the first time, she saw warmth in those ice-blue eyes. Said no, told them I'd already chosen. If the lady would have me. Eliza stopped breathing. A man needs a partner who sees what needs doing, and does it without being asked. Jakob continued quietly. Someone who understands that love is in the work, not the words. Someone who'd spend all night fixing a stranger's boots just because it was the right thing to do. He took a step closer. "Don't care what you look like, Eliza. I care that you're the first person in 5 years who saw me instead of what they wanted from me. I care that your hands create instead of destroy. I care that you're strong enough to be kind in a town that's given you every reason not to be." Eliza's tears came fresh, but different now. "I'm not what anyone wants," she said brokenly. "You're exactly what I want," Jakob replied, "if you'll have a broken-down mountain man with more past than future." Eliza looked at this man who'd chosen her over beauty, over land, over promises of comfort. She thought about how he'd seen her when she was invisible, how he'd valued her work when others dismissed it, how he'd stood beside her when she'd been alone. "Yes," she whispered. Then stronger, "Yes." Jakob Thornfield married Eliza, Hartwell, on a May morning with only the preacher and 2 witnesses present. The widows of Pinewood Ridge were scandalized, offended, outraged. They stopped speaking to Eliza entirely, which suited her fine. She moved to Jakob's mountain cabin, where she set up a small workshop and discovered that the view from loneliness looked different when you had someone to share it with. And every night before bed, she'd check Jakob's boots, not because they needed checking, but because love, she'd learned, lived in the small, silent acts of caring that no one else might ever see. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Share it with someone who needs to remember that true love sees past appearances to the soul beneath. Hit that like button and comment below what you loved most about Jakob and Eliza's story. We share powerful tales of love, worth, and redemption every week. Don't miss the next one.